Welcome in to the Rock Talk Studio, the podcast that answers the question, is this rock and roll book or documentary worth your time and money? Today I'm going to be taking a look at the documentary Catching Fire, the story of Anita Pallenberg, which I'll review, I'll rate, and then I'll determine if this doc is for you. And then, as always, I'll leave you with all the book buzz and documentary news you don't want to miss out on, including an announcement of a documentary from one of the greatest rock bands of all time. Some might even say the best of all time. I'm your host, Big Rick. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens, and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. All right, let's dive into the review of Catching Fire, the story of Anita Pallenberg. Catching Fire is really like two documentaries rolled into one. The first one, the first half of the doc, showcases the beginning of Pallenberg's life, her magnetic appeal, her charisma, and her status as an up-and-coming scenester. Part one was also before she started using heavy drugs. Part two was about when Anita Pallenberg was on drugs, which really sucks. Both have some interesting moments, but I'm sure, as you can imagine, the second half is where things start getting a little ugly. The documentary is narrated by the smooth voice, which was an interesting pick, of Scarlett Johansson, and the words she narrates are taken from the manuscript called Black Magic. This was an autobiography that Anita was writing, or actually wrote, but never published. A lot of this doc is made up of interviews from people scattered throughout Anita's life. And along with the interviews are a ton of really, really interesting in-depth home movies. And they're great because, you know, they're coming from the 60s into the 70s. So you get this grainy, spliced up, behind the scenes look at what her life really was like. And then, of course, you get the Rolling Stones. Pallenberg met the Stones in 1965 when they were giving a concert in Munich and was really taken by Brian Jones and soon became involved with the Stone. You get a real up-close and personal look at the dark reality of their rocky and sometimes violent relationship. A large part of this doc is dedicated to this relationship and her following relationship, which was with Keith Richards. The amount of behind-the-scenes home movie stuff is pretty extensive here. And you see Brian and Keith in a bunch of never-before-seen shots and environments. This is where the doc bogs down a little bit, believe it or not. Even though the seeing the Stones and the home movie stuff is really cool, kind of seen this stuff before with the Brian Jones. And I think that's why it kind of bogged down for me because, I mean, there was two documentaries about Brian Jones and the Stones that came out last year. I actually saw the other night, it's playing on Hulu, one of them, Brian Jones and the Stones. So to me, this is where I could use a little trimming. I could have used a little trimming. It got a little boring, and it was probably the only time during the documentary that just slowed down a little bit too much for me. On the highlight side of things, you get a ton of Keith Richards' really frank commentary on what was going on during that period of their lives. And Keith really loved Anita a lot, and it showed in the way he talked about her. And as I mentioned at the start, it really starts to turn when the amount of drug use gets turned up. I don't know if anyone that could hang with Richards during this intense party time. And Anita unfortunately got sucked into that world while trying to raise a family. Anita and Keith's kids also participate in telling this story, specifically how hard it was having drug addicts as parents. And it gets pretty dark here. The kids went through a lot, being brought up in an environment that really no good could come out of unscathed. Keith's son Marlon goes pretty deep, including a pretty disturbing, kind of beyond insensitive moment in Keith Richards' life. Not going to spoil it, but it's not pretty. I got to give this doc some credit for not holding back. It's a very personal look at not only Anita, but her family also. And you can't help from feeling sad from seeing this. I mean, Pallenberg, who at one time had so much potential and really worked her way up from nothing. It's a remarkable story. There was a part where she recounts how her first memory as a child was hearing planes drop bombs on her neighborhood. She grew up during the Second World War. She overcame just so much. There was a time when she was pretty much in a league of her own. The shots of her modeling and acting, you just can't keep your eyes off her. A ton of people looked up to her. Gimme Shelter and You Can't Always Get What You Want were written with her as the inspiration. She was a force of nature. And this documentary is a raw look of her success and failures. Anita is quoted towards the end of the doc saying, "It doesn't need to be a doom and gloom kind of story." Unfortunately, this doc, though put together really well, is a story with a lot of dark parts that can't help but overshadow the question of what might have been for Anita Pallenberg. Catching Fire, the story of Anita Pallenberg, runs an hour and 53 minutes and is directed by Alexis Bloom and Svetlana Zil. All right, now it's time to stamp the official Rock Talk Studio rating on Catching Fire. Let's see where this book stacks up with the other titles I reviewed. Let's give it a rating coming up next. All right, let's jump into the rating for the documentary Catching Fire, the story of Anita Pallenberg. If you're new to the show, here's how my rating is set up. It's a 1 through 4 rating system. A 1 is a front row center. It's a don't miss, one of a kind, very unique, doesn't come around a lot, but it's one of those must haves. A 2 is a floor seat, and it's a highly recommend title, something that I really enjoyed, something I would go out of my way to recommend to anybody. A 3, that's a load seat. That's okay. It could be recommended or it could be a pass. It's not bad. It can go either way. And a 4, you're in the nosebleeds, baby. Catching Fire is a 3. It's a load seat. I would recommend checking it out. Though for a doc about Anita's life, I think it could have really benefited from less focus on the Rolling Stones. And as a rock and roll junkie, I'm all about that stuff. But I was looking for more about Anita and who she was as a person. I wanted a little bit more of that. I wanted to know about what drove her, especially during the time of recovery, once she kicked drugs and got back into the fashion scene and started inspiring people once again. The film does show how much of an inspiration she was on Kate Moss. That's explored. It comes towards the end of the film. And after all she went through and the time spent on showing us how intense it was, it just didn't add up and didn't add that much weight to the overall story. So I'm going to give Catching Fire a 3. Check it out. I've got a bunch more book and documentary reviews and recommendations for you, and that is in the archives of the show. A year and a half now of a ton of books and documentaries. I've got recently talking about a really great book called Drums and Demons about Jim Gordon. I really highly recommend everybody go check that out. You can find that in episodes, 2 episodes back. I just reviewed the Geddy Lee book. There's a book about 20 female badasses in rock and roll talking about feminism. That's a very unique and a great book. So dig back into the archives. You can check out a lot of great stuff and a lot of great recommendations. I've also got another really good recommendation for a podcast. And the podcast is called The Blues Guitar Show. It's a show by Ben Martin, who is a great guitar player and has taught me a lot. I love this show. You've got teaching about guitars. You've got talk about guitars, focusing on blues guitar, but also rock stuff too. There's recording tips, there's theory tips, there's gear tips, there's interviews, a really cool show about learning and about just guitar in general. Here's a trailer from the show. Let's take a listen.
Hey everybody, Ben from the Blues Guitar Show podcast here. Are you a frustrated guitarist wishing you could play great songs and awesome sounding solos but just don't know where to start? I'm on a mission to get you into the nitty-gritty of playing blues, rock and country guitar. The Blues Guitar Show podcast comes out every Monday with a new guitar lesson. Some weeks we cover a classic song, sometimes a riff, sometimes a solo or theory concept, always with the mind of playing great music with great people. I've had everyone on the show from heavy hitters like The Who to rockabilly legends, all giving advice and demos to help you on your guitar playing journey. Check out the Blues Guitar Show podcast today, anywhere that you find podcasts. See you there.
That's Ben and his great podcast, The Blues Guitar Show. Head on over to any of your directories where you get your podcast and check it out. All right, let's jump into this part of the show. This is the part of the show where I give you all the book buzz and documentary news that's happening out there. You don't have to look around. You don't have to search around. And I got it all condensed here for you on the show. And today there is 3 really huge titles that were announced that are going to be coming out. And they're all happen to be documentaries. So I got 3 documentaries to let you know about. Kind of tease this one in the beginning. This new documentary is about Led Zeppelin. And it's called Becoming Led Zeppelin. Sony Pictures has finally acquired the rights to this documentary called Becoming Led Zeppelin. It's a documentary of never before seen footage, performances, music. It's being billed as a cinematic odyssey exploring Zeppelin's creative, musical, and personal origin story. It's told in Zeppelin's own words, and it's the first officially sanctioned film on the group. This thing screened a few years ago at the Venice Film Festival, and it received a 10-minute standing ovation. A lot of people have been looking forward to this. I know I have. I heard some rumblings about it a few years ago. It was getting close, but now that Sony's got it, we'll see. The film features brand new sound mix, newly unearthed material from the archives on all 4 band members, including home movies and family photos, and exclusive interviews with Jimmy, Robert Plant, and John Paul Jones, as well as never before heard interviews with the late John Bonham. Wow. I mean, Page said in a press release, "When I saw the early cut of the film premiered at the Venice Film Festival, it was amazing. The energy of the story and the power of the music is phenomenal." And for Page to come out and say that he thinks highly of this is kind of rare. And I mean, Zeppelin doesn't let anything come out if they don't feel lives up to their standards, especially Jimmy's been really watching over the archives. And I just got to have a lot of hope for this. I mean, it's just great that they're announcing a Zeppelin documentary. It's great that Jimmy's behind it. No release date as of yet, but when I get that information, I'll definitely make sure that you'll be the first to know. Documentary number 2, Los Lobos, Native Sons documentary. Fresh off the celebration of 50 years together of the band, this announcement comes out. A band with all original members, one of my favorite all-time bands who I saw so many times in the early stages of their career when I lived in Hollywood. Los Lobos gets a documentary. I can't wait to see this. It's a career-spanning look with testimonials from Linda Ronstadt, Tom Waits, Bonnie Raitt, and Flaco Jimenez, to name a few. Talk about a band that deserves more attention. I really hope this does well and gives the band their moment in the sun. This one is currently in production. The film crews have been out this year filming them. It's set to come out sometime in 2025. No release yet on that one either. Number 3, Little Steven documentary. And this one is called Disciple. It just premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. No release yet on this one either, but it was picked up by HBO. So we'll probably see this one there and probably see it pretty soon. If this doc is half as good as Stevie's memoir that came out a couple years ago called Unrequited Infatuations, I think it's going to be great. I really love that book. It was one of the first books that I actually reviewed on the podcast way back when I started the podcast about 1.5 years ago. So if you want to learn more about that, you can dig way back to the beginning in the archives to hear my review on the Little Stevie book. Little Steven is the champion for rock and roll. He's a true believer. He does so much for getting music taught in schools. I just love his passion for what he likes to call the art form known as rock and roll. This is another one I can't wait to see, the Little Steven doc called Disciple. And that wraps up the big 3 docs that are headed our way. Next week's episode will feature a few books that were just announced. For all you book fans out there, I haven't forgot about you, but these 3 docs were just so big and they were just announced. So we're going to do some book news next week. Thanks for tuning in. Love talking rock and roll and getting a chance to recommend a few titles for you. I hope you found a few things that you might be interested in checking out. Just because the episode is over does not mean the conversation is. You can join me on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube for more book and doc talk. All right, tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. I'll see you next time in the Rock Talk studio.